Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to Support World Virtual and this presentation, Brave New World, the Future of Service and Support. This portion of Support World Virtual is brought to you by IBM. And there's a link to their website right in the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk window. I'm Roy Atkinson, Group Principal Analyst for HDI, and we have just a couple of housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. It works wonders. You can participate in Q&A by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they will be answered during the Q&A session towards the end of the webcast as time permits. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. And this webinar will be available on demand shortly, and you'll receive a reminder to that effect and information. The slide deck for this presentation is available for download. Check out the Attachments tab and check out the useful links there. With us today is Jeff Rumberg. Jeff is a winner of the Ron Munz Lifetime Achievement Award, was named one of HDI's top 25 thought leaders in technical support and service for 4 consecutive years, and has served on HDI's Strategic Advisory Board. He's the co-founder and managing partner of MetricNet, LLC, where he is responsible for global strategy, product development, and client engagement delivery. As a leading expert in benchmarking and re-engineering, Jeff has authored the best-selling book on benchmarking and has been retained as a benchmarking expert by such iconic companies as American Express, Intel, Coca-Cola, and Emory Healthcare. Jeff, over to you.
Roy, thank you for those kind remarks. And I can honestly say it's always such a pleasure to be a part of an HDI event, whether it's a local chapter meeting event, a national event in Orlando or Las Vegas, or today's virtual event. It's my honor and my pleasure to be here to talk about the brave new world of service and support. I want to start with a really high-level concept, and we're going to work our way down to the specifics as we go through our presentation today. Last year, 2019, the worldwide economy was about $85 trillion. That includes all goods and services, everything from manufacturing, autos and computers, to services, insourcing, outsourcing. All of IT, put everything together, and the whole world's economy was about $85 trillion in goods and services. Now, if we drill down on that, we can see that IT was about $5 trillion of that. So around 7% of the global economy is information technology. And if we go further down to IT service management, a discipline that's about 50 years old now, it was originally invented in 1971, 1972, or at least that's when the first mention of the term ITSM, IT service management, came out. About $1.5 trillion of our global economy is IT service management. Now of that, our industry, global IT service and support, everything from level -1 support or level -2 support, which I'll define for you a little bit later in my presentation, all the way to vendor support. That includes level 1 support, desktop support, field services, all the way to vendor support. We're talking about a $250 billion industry that employs approximately 7 million people worldwide. So that's our slice of the industry. The world's economy is $250 billion and roughly 7 million FTEs. Now, the ITSM industry, which is $1.5 trillion, if you take the IT off of that and look just at service management, enterprise service management, that's about a $7.5 trillion industry. And I'll have more to say on that as we get into our presentation a little bit further. But think of our industry, IT service and support, is employing roughly 7 million people worldwide, and approximately last year, 2019, about $250 billion. But our beginnings, like many industries, were quite humble. Now, please save the jokes about me being one of the people in this photo. I can promise you that I'm not. But this shows an early data center, and I've circled 2 items in this particular photo, and they're both rotary dial phones. This is what an early service desk looked like. It was actually part of a mainframe data center. And generally, there were only 3 types of calls that came in. There would be a call coming in for a job abend, an abnormal ending for a batch application written either in COBOL or Fortran, and the author of the code would say, hey, my job app ended, let me send some new punch cards over, and can you rerun the job for me? Or it would be a connectivity issue. A big university or a big corporation that was using the mainframe computer would have lost connectivity, and they would call and ask the data center people if they could check the connectivity on their end. And the third, and this one is really interesting, it was the single most common type of call back then. Believe it or not, it was a password reset. And today, 50 years later, actually this is more like 70 years later if you look at the genre of those computers and the personnel that are working in this data center, today still the number one type of call that comes into a level 1 service desk is a password reset. I find that ironic given that there are a lot of good tools and technologies out there that it can enable users to self-authenticate and reset their own passwords. But the beginnings of this industry were quite humble. But look how far we've come. There's been a dramatic change in the people and the process and the technology that define this industry. So when you think about this typical paradigm, people, process, and technology, what's happening right now is that the number one skill set that recruiters look for in IT service and support is not technical skills, it's not interpersonal skills, it's business skills. And so that's a real change from what we've seen historically where the focus has been on soft skills, interpersonal skills, and technical skills. We all know that ITIL 4 was rolled out in February of this year. That's changing the way organizations in IT service support worldwide approach the process of delivering IT services. And then in technology, you can't have a conversation for more than 15, 20, or 30 seconds before somebody brings up artificial intelligence. Now, for the first time in my career, I've been in this industry about 30 years now, and for the first time in my career, there's a tipping point, a convergence, if you will, of these three phenomenon where we don't have technology leading process and people, nor do we have process leading technology and people, nor do we have people leading process and technology. They are all advancing at approximately the same rate. And I know it's a bit of a cliche to say that we're at an inflection point or we're at a disruption point in the industry, but it really is the case. We can look at a whole lot of indicators that demonstrate to us that we are at an inflection point in this industry. And all of you who work in IT service and support, who are comfortable in your jobs and enjoy doing this kind of work, your jobs are going to look really different 2 years from now and especially 5 years from now. And this presentation is about what that job is going to look like 2, 3, 4, or 5 years from now and how you can anticipate and prepare for the IT service and support profession of the future. Now, past as prologue is an expression that came out of a play that was written 410 years ago by Shakespeare. It's The Tempest. That saying, past as prologue, was made famous by that play. And in its most benign interpretation, it simply means that we can learn from the past. And in its more aggressive interpretation, it means that we might be able to predict some things about the future by looking at the past. And I tend to subscribe to that latter view, which is that if we're smart about how we interpret the events of the past, we can probably, with some reasonable degree of certainty, predict some things that are likely to happen in the future. And so what I'm going to do is go back about 50 years or 60 years in time and talk about the auto industry and how it evolved over about a 60-year period of time and what the implications are for IT service and support, because past is prologue. Now, the auto industry in North America, which consisted of General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, the so-called Big Three, was the biggest industry in the world until about 1970, and it was dominated more than 70% market share by North American auto manufacturers. And by 1970, things started to change. We started to see cars being imported primarily from Japan, but some from Europe, some from other Asian countries. But it was primarily Japanese imports from Datsun, which later became Nissan, Toyota, and other Japanese manufacturers. And for 38 years, starting in 1970, and there's a reason I picked 38 years, 1970 to 2008, on average, every single day, these big freighters, big, container ships, would stop in ports of Oakland, San Pedro in Los Angeles, Houston, Newark, New York Harbor, and they would drop off an average of 10,000 cars a day. For 38 years, if you can imagine that, 10,000 imported cars a day for 38 years. The reason I picked 38 years is because that's how long it took Toyota to become the largest auto manufacturer in the world. By 2008, they had surpassed General Motors as the largest auto manufacturer in the world. So by 1990, the U.S. auto industry was flat on its back. They had lost market share. The quality of their products was not very good. And individuals, consumers worldwide were fleeing the big three and the European auto manufacturers, and they were buying these lower cost, higher mileage imports. What saved the North American auto industry was AI. First, it was bots that painted the cars, then it was bots that welded the cars, then it was bots that put the engines and the drivetrains in the cars, it was bots that put the wheels on. And unlike the assembly line workers of 1970 who wore hard hats and carried wrenches, the assembly line workers today are likely to be engineers that are looking at multiple computer screens and looking at whether or not the body panels are aligned correctly and whether or not the paint has the right density. They laser measure everything. And what saved the North American auto industry was really artificial intelligence, represented by the bots in the right-hand screen there. Now let me draw an analogy between this and what's happened in IT service and support. And I don't think it's a stretch, and it gets back to the title of this slide, which is that we can learn something about the past and apply it to what's going on now or what has happened in the more recent future in IT service and support. The vast majority of IT service and support until about 1990 was delivered out of Western Europe and North America, the U.S. and Canada, and then the developed Western European countries. But by 1990, there were a number of companies that began to realize that VoIP, voice over IP, is a relatively mature technology, and why can't we do level 1 support from maybe India or the Philippines or Hungary or some other low-cost part of the world? And so what we started to see was a massive shift in level 1 support to offshore location. Now, reshoring, that is bringing support back, level 1 support back from offshore to North America, began to surpass offshoring in about 2016, 2017. So over the last 3 years, 4 years, we've seen more reshoring, that is bringing more level 1 support back onshore than we see level 1 support going offshore. And a big part of it has to do with this AI technology in service and support that allows level 1 passwords to be reset by the users, that allows basic problems to be resolved, incidents to be resolved in Microsoft Windows, Microsoft Office. And so we can see parallels between how the auto industry evolved over about 50 or 60 years and how IT service and support have evolved over 50 or 60 years. So let's take a look into the future and use this as our guide. The past is prologue. And what I want to do is connect some dots for you. First one being that things that have mattered historically still matter. Better, faster, cheaper refers to higher quality, quicker resolution times, that is quicker MTTRs, and lower cost per ticket, or better yet, lower total cost of ownership. Service and support is increasingly being viewed not just as an internal service or a cost center, but rather as an internal business, something that can create economic value. And it's staffed with business people. I've already alluded to that. And ROI is increasingly becoming the measure of success in service and support. So although better, faster, cheaper, that is total cost of ownership per ticket, MTTR, and quality, however you want to measure it, whether it's customer satisfaction, customer experience score, customer effort, or an overall CX measurement, ROI is becoming the dominant measure of success in service and support. Moreover, industry literacy is a valued commodity. It's becoming paramount. Historically, in this industry, there wasn't a lot of literacy around metrics. There wasn't a lot of literacy around a lot of things, and I'll give you an example when I get to this slide. But understanding the business perspective of IT service and support, understanding metrics, what drives what are the cause and effect relationships, and what does your particular environment look like in terms of monthly ticket volume, cost per ticket, customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, and mean time to resolve. What does that basic information look like? That level of literacy is going to become paramount going forward. Technology, as much as people like to talk about disruptive technologies, they have not been disruptive in this industry, and they will not be disruptive in this industry. They will continue to be incremental. The disruptive changes happen outside of IT service and support. More on that when I get to that slide. Idle hacks are taking the place of proper idle training and assessments, and there's a reason for that. Channel mix will continue to accelerate, meaning drive contacts out of voice and into lower cost channels, including chat and self-help. And then in the midst of all this, enterprise services represents opportunities, the greatest career opportunity in a generation for those who are in IT service and support. Enterprise services need your expertise, they need your experience, but most of all, they need your leadership. So there are going to be new opportunities that emerge in the future. Now let's talk about first principles, better, faster, cheaper. when we take a huge amount of benchmarking data and we regress customer satisfaction versus total cost of ownership per ticket, those are two tactical measures of success. And then on the z-axis, we can put our ROI. Now, we had this data mapped by a professional organization to create the red, yellow, green, the green being where you want to operate. That's high customer satisfaction, low TCO per ticket, and high ROI. But what is it that drives you there? What does the thermometer or barometer look like that gets you to that sweet spot? It's your process maturity. And so the idea that process drives performance is represented by this slide, and this is as close as I can come to what I would call the unified theory of IT service and support, which is that the maturity of your processes, and I'm not talking specifically about ITIL now, I'm talking about all processes that you engage in, from human resources to ticket handling to technology. The maturity of those processes will drive where you land on that map. So if you're looking for high CSAT, low TCO per ticket, and high ROI, the way you get there is by maturing your processes. So these first principles, better, faster, cheaper, driving high ROI, the way you get there is by maturing your processes. These are foundational principles. It's like the second law of thermodynamics. That isn't going to change regardless of the amount of ROI, onshoring, offshoring, regardless of the amount of AI, onshoring, offshoring, or anything else. This is a first principle that will always remain in place. Now, increasingly, service and support is being viewed as a business. Historically, service and support was seen as a cost center. Now, a cost center is a cost of doing business. Think of insurance, think of floor space, think of your gas and electric utilities. You need them to be in business, but they don't create economic value. Well, service and support has historically been viewed as something that was nothing but a cost center. But increasingly, service and support is being viewed as a value-centric entity that creates economic value and that can be measured by ROI. They leverage metrics. You know, it's an article of faith that most businesses run on financial metrics, but historically, metrics have been a fairly weak discipline within IT service and support. But the most effective support organizations understand how value is created through shift left, channel mix, and return productivity to end users. They leverage metrics from a cause and effect perspective to understand how they can drive better outcomes. They tend to be proactive. They don't wait for opportunities to come to them. They're out there searching for opportunities, whether they be AI endpoint bots or other technologies, for example, password reset technologies. They understand this connection between process and performance, and they understand that messaging is critically important. That is, you need to communicate the value that you're creating within the organization because you will not automatically be given credit for that. You actually have to market yourself effectively internally. So the overall model is that service and support, even if you're internal to an enterprise, I'm not talking now about outsourcers per se. What I'm saying is that even if you're delivering support internal to an enterprise, you can think and act and operate like a profit-making business. And those are the most successful IT service and support organizations. So let me address one aspect of literacy, because literacy increasingly does matter. What I'm showing here is a cause and effect relationship for the typical metrics that you would see in a level 1 service desk. The dark blue metrics are what we consider to be the key performance indicators. Not every metric is a KPI, but every KPI is a metric. And the ones that are in dark blue are the ones that really matter. You can manage a service and support organization very effectively with just that limited number of metrics. But I rattled off some KPIs a little bit earlier: monthly ticket volume or contact volume, your cost per ticket, your first contact resolution rate, your customer satisfaction, and your mean time to resolve. When I go into a support organization to do a benchmark or an assessment, I generally ask some pretty basic questions around the environment, and those are the questions I ask. And I would say that fewer than 5% of IT service and support professionals can answer those basic questions. And I find that shocking because if you think about it, everybody knows what their address is, what kind of car they drive, where their kids go to school, and name everything else. But if you spend 40 hours a week or 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week in an IT support environment, it seems to me you ought to know your monthly ticket volume, your cost per ticket, your customer satisfaction, your first contact resolution rate, and your mean time to resolve. It's really basic stuff. So that's my test of literacy, is does this person understand the environment that they operate in? And then go a little bit further, do they understand this cause and effect? Because it turns out that there is a lot of lack of literacy. I don't want to say illiteracy. That's a pejorative. What I do want to say is that there's a lot of misunderstanding around metrics, and understanding your basic situation, call it situational awareness, would be the ability to answer those 5 questions. You know, what does your monthly contact volume look like, and the other 4 questions. Now, the bots are coming. This isn't meant to be ominous by any stretch of the imagination. We've already seen personnel displaced, even in low-cost countries, Eastern Europe, the Philippines, and India. We're starting to see AI bots that deliver solutions to users, as well as endpoint bots that monitor the environment, the servers and the peripherals, and they preemptively alert about pending problems, pending failures. But these bots need time to mature. Now, there's a common belief that IBM's Watson, and this is just one of many AI tools out there. I'm not promoting, nor am I trying to take away from IBM Watson. I'm just using it as an example. There's a common belief that Deep Blue, which was an IBM project that began in the early 1970s, where a bunch of IBM engineers taught a supercomputer how to play chess. Deep Blue was beaten pretty badly the first time it played a chess champion. That was Bobby Fischer back in 1972, who won every single game in a match that Bobby Fischer played against Deep Blue. And the IBM engineers that were working on this were all chess players, and they couldn't figure out, why isn't this computer smart enough to beat the best chess player in the world? Well, it was because they were telling the computer how to play chess, and they weren't as good as the best chess players in the world. So they finally came up with this idea that we need to teach Deep Blue how to teach itself. How can it learn from its own mistakes, and how can it project 1,000 moves, 1,000,000 moves, 1,000,000,000 and 1,000,000,000,000 moves into the future, and look at all the probabilities and decide what the best possible move is given the layout of the chessboard. And it took 26 years until 1996, but Deep Blue finally did beat Garry Kasparov. And it didn't beat Garry Kasparov, who was the best chess player at the time, by the IBM engineers teaching Deep Blue how to play chess. It beat Garry Kasparov because it learned machine learning. In other words, it started to teach itself how to play chess, and it got better over time. Well, the demos I've seen of the AI bots and IT service and support, I haven't seen examples of machine learning yet. They will get there, no doubt. And again, this is not meant to endorse or put anybody down, but what I've seen so far in the AI demonstrations is that generally you feed an AI bot a knowledge article, and it will give the article answer back to the customer, solve low-end incidents. Eventually, machine learning will kick in, but right now, AI is not a disruptive technology. And I'll go a little bit further and say that there's never been a disruptive technology in this industry. The technologies come from outside the industry, the new technologies, whether it's ticketing systems, whether it's remote control systems like BombGar and LogMeIn, AI. These are all technologies that develop in other industries, and then they are adopted and adapted in IT service and support. And that's not to diminish the importance of technology, but rather to say that, everyone's fond of saying that the technology will be disruptive, but there haven't been any disruptive technologies in this industry. What have been disruptive are paradigm shifts. And what I'm showing here is a fully loaded cost of resolving tickets at various level of supports in a service and support organization. And I added one to this, which is level -2, because increasingly our clients are starting to adopt these technologies. I call them endpoint bots that actually seek and destroy or search and destroy will alert IT professionals to pending failure on a hard drive or a server or a peripheral device, or even in some cases in applications. This will be a disruptive paradigm shift because it's even better than self-help. It's even better than incident prevention. Think of incident prevention as problem management. It used to be called root cause analysis. The idea that there's a known problem that has some attached incidents to it, and you go and you try and find the root causes of that known problem and eliminate those. Search and destroy or seek and destroy doesn't even let it become an incident. It identifies preemptively pending failures, and it alerts the IT professionals to replace the server, replace the hard drive, whatever it might be, provide the training that's necessary for the end users so they don't have the issue in the first place. So these paradigm shifts, this is just one example of them, will in fact be disruptive going forward. I mentioned idle hacks earlier, and I can honestly say that the individuals in this industry that I work with, they become kind of weary of the progression, the sequence, if you will, of idle training, idle certification, idle audits, and on and on and on. And increasingly what we're finding is that the most successful when it comes to idle or hacking idle, in the sense that they like the result of knowledge management and incident management and problem management. And by the way, there are 34 practices in IDLE 4 and 26 processes in IDLE 3. I was hoping that it would become less complex, not more complex, but that isn't what happened. And so this kind of accelerated this path towards idle hacks, where companies who've historically spent millions or even tens of millions of dollars on idle certification training and the like are saying, wait a second, let's look at the end result of knowledge management, lower handle times, higher first contact resolution rate. Let's look at the end result of problem management, which are fewer incidents on a monthly basis. And let's get to that directed result by using design thinking. Let's sit down with the smartest people in the organization and work backwards from the result we want out of problem management or knowledge management, and they back into that result and they create a solution that is unique to their environment, informed by their particular eccentricities, if you will, within that environment. And we are seeing organizations that literally stand up knowledge management in a week and start seeing significant results from it in terms of reduction in handle time and increases in FCR within a matter of weeks. Same thing with problem management. They're not going through this long progression of training and certification. They're getting results in a matter of days and weeks, to the point where, in one example, one of the largest insurance companies in North America reduced their monthly ticket volume from 150,000 per month to under 60,000 per month by hacking problem management. And they did that in less than a year. So they didn't follow the traditional ITIL path. They buy into the idea of the result of problem management, knowledge management, and incident management, but they just don't go about it in the traditional way. Now, what's the elephant in the room? Well, this is the fact that the number one strategic objective of IT service and support is to make end users more productive. That doesn't get talked about enough. We think about, better, faster, cheaper. Well, how about making the user more productive? It turns out we can quantify that. And we know that if you're performing in the top quartile in IT service and support, your end users are still going to lose about 17 productive hours per year, Q1 on the far left here. By contrast, if you're unlucky enough to work in an organization that has fourth quartile IT service and support, you lose about 47 productive hours per year. So imagine improving your performance to the point where you go from fourth quartile to first quartile, you return 30 productive hours per end user per year, multiply that by the number of personnel within a large organization, you can monetize that, and this is how you get to ROIs in service and support that are 500%, 600%, 700%. Part of it is shift left, part of it is channel mix, but a big part of it is that you make the end users more productive. And that is the single most important thing, most important strategic objective, in my opinion, of IT service and support is let HR people work in HR, let manufacturing work in manufacturing, get the IT obstacles out of their way and return their productivity. We know that channel mix is accelerating. Voice as a percentage of total is now less than 50%. Chat is growing, as is email and web submitted tickets and self-help, self-service. That is going to continue to accelerate. The most recent data we show here is 2018, but each of these progressions is driven by two things. Number one, economics. That is, as you deflect into lower cost channels, you get lower cost. And the second one is demographics. As newer workers enter the workforce, what we're seeing is a proclivity, that is a preference for the indirect channels, which would include chat, email, and self-help, self-service. And we see that trend continuing. The enterprise services opportunity, I think, is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I started very early on by telling you that IT service management is about a $1.5 trillion industry, but service management without the IT on the front end is about a $7.5 trillion industry. Yet they tend to be very antiquated. If you go into an HR department or facilities management or legal services, they tend not to operate with the same set of processes and procedures or tools that IT service and support has, ITSM has. Well, you have an opportunity as IT support professionals to allow these non-IT enterprise services to leapfrog ahead and bypass 50 years of trial and error, incremental improvement by offering your experience, your expertise, and your leadership. It's the greatest opportunity in a generation, and I want to encourage all of you to take advantage of that opportunity and bring your skill sets to the table to help advance the cause of enterprise service management. So past is prologue. We know that the demands on the personnel are changing from technical support to business support, process, ITIL 4, or specifically hacking ITIL, and finally, AI is going to change the industry, but it's not going to be disruptive change. Finally, let me make a remark about the title of this presentation, which is A Brave New World. I named it that because when I was in high school, for my 10th grade English class, A Brave New World was required reading. It's a book written by Aldous Huxley in 1931 and published in 1932. And I didn't know anything about the book until I started reading it, so I assumed it was going to be some sunny projection of what the future utopia in worldwide was going to look like, but it was just the opposite. It was about a dark future with a lot of injustice and suffering. And it always bothered me that the title was so different from what the actual book was. And so I decided to name this presentation A Brave New World because I did want to paint a very bucolic, not necessarily utopian, but a very bucolic picture of the future, because I think the future belongs to those that are willing to seize it. And I think for those that are engaged in this industry, there is a bright future that awaits all of you. So I might have time for 1 or 2 questions, Roy, but I'm going to give you a chance to moderate the questions and make sure that I stay on time and don't go over the time I've been allotted.
Right. We actually only have about 20 seconds remaining. I'll just read a remark rather than ask a question. It says, not a question, but man, that was action-packed. So thank you for that, Jeff. And
right.
Thank you especially to IBM, our sponsor for this portion of Support World Virtual. And Jeff Rumberg, to you, thank you so much. This webcast is copyright 2020 by Informa Tech. Presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by HDI, or by the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of HDI and our sponsor IBM for this session, to thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thanks, Roy. It was a pleasure to be here.